The Japanese Type 92 machine gun opened fire at 0323 hours on November 21, 1943, and Private Jack Morrison felt 3 bullets hit the coral rock 2 inches from his face, hot metal fragments cutting into his cheek while he pressed himself flat into the Tarawa beach sand that was already soaked with American blood. The machine gun was positioned in a concrete pillbox 80 meters inland, firing in calculated bursts that swept the beach like a scythe. And Morrison had watched that gun kill 17 Marines in the past 40 minutes. Boys from Iowa and Texas and California who'd waded ashore at 0240 hours expecting to hit a beach softened by naval bombardment, only to discover that 3 days of shelling hadn't touched the Japanese fortifications at all. Morrison was a coal miner from West Virginia, 31 years old, drafted in 1942 because the Marines needed bodies more than coal, and he was holding a broken shovel blade that weighed 1.8 pounds and shouldn't have been anywhere near a Pacific island. But Jack Morrison had spent 14 years underground in McDowell County mines, learning how coal seams split when you hit them at precise angles, and he was about to prove that sometimes a miner understands structural failure better than every military engineer in the Pacific Fleet. The smell hit Morrison even harder than the fear, a nauseating mix of cordite smoke, salt water, and human waste from Marines who'd lost bowel control in the killing zone, combined with something sweet and rotten that Morrison's brain refused to identify, but his gut knew was burning flesh from flamethrower attacks further down the beach. The Type 92 fired again, a long burst that kicked up sand geysers marching toward Morrison's position, and he pressed his face deeper into the coral grit while his hands gripped the shovel blade so hard his knuckles went white. The blade had broken 3 hours ago when Morrison was trying to dig a fighting position, snapped clean at the handle joint because the Navy had issued them cheap contractor-grade shovels instead of proper entrenching tools. And now, Morrison was stuck with 18 inches of curved steel that the Marine Corps considered worthless. Except Morrison didn't see a broken shovel. He saw a pry bar, a wedge, a tool for splitting rock, the same tool he'd used for 14 years, breaking coal from tight seams where proper mining equipment couldn't fit. Behind Morrison, Corporal Hayes was screaming into a radio, trying to get naval gunfire support on the pillbox. But the response kept coming back negative. Too many Marines too close to the target, friendly fire risk too high, request denied. The pillbox had to be taken by infantry assault, which meant someone had to cross 80 meters of open beach under machine gun fire that had already killed 17 men, reach the pillbox somehow alive, and disable it with grenades or satchel charges or sheer desperate luck. The Marines had tried twice already. The first assault team got cut down at 40 meters, all 5 men dead before they cleared the waterline. The second team made it to 60 meters before the Type 92 caught them in enfilade fire, killed 3, wounded 2. The wounded men were still screaming out there in the dark, begging for help. No one could give them because crossing open ground toward that pillbox was suicide. Morrison listened to the screaming, counted the seconds between machine gun bursts. The Japanese gunner was disciplined, firing calculated bursts of 7 to 9 rounds, pausing to let the barrel cool, maintaining fire discipline that prevented overheating, and started calculating approach angles and dead space the way he'd calculated coal extraction angles for 14 years. The pillbox was reinforced concrete, probably 3 feet thick, based on the fact that 16-inch naval shells hadn't cracked it, with a firing slit positioned to cover the beach approach at a slight downward angle. Standard Japanese defensive construction, textbook positioning, absolutely lethal to frontal assault. But Morrison had spent 14 years looking at structures that everyone said were solid, finding the weak points where stress concentrated, exploiting those weak points with tools and leverage. Every structure has failure points, every wall has seams. You just have to know where to look and how to hit them. Morrison examined the pillbox through gaps in the coral rock, studied the concrete in the muzzle flashlight from the Type 92, and saw what every other Marine had missed. The firing slit wasn't a simple opening cut through solid concrete. It was formed by concrete poured around a steel reinforcement frame, which meant there was an interface between steel and concrete, which meant there was a potential weak point if you could get a tool into that interface and apply the right kind of leveraged force. The physics were identical to splitting coal from tight seams. Find the natural fault line, insert a wedge, apply force at the correct angle, and the material separates along the line of least resistance. Morrison's broken shovel blade was essentially a wedge, 18 inches of curved steel with a tapered edge, weighing 1.8 pounds with enough mass to deliver meaningful force if wielded properly. The challenge was getting close enough to use it, which required crossing 80 meters of beach under fire from a machine gun that had already killed 17 Marines doing exactly that. Morrison did the mathematics automatically, Miner's calculations about risk and probability. 17 deaths divided by 2 attempts equals 8.5 casualties per assault. Current Marine complement on this beach sector, approximately 47 men. 3 more failed assaults would wipe out the unit, and then the Japanese would have free rein to sweep the beach with machine gun fire until dawn, when they could see well enough to kill everyone. The mathematics were simple. Someone had to take out that pillbox. Now. Morrison told Corporal Hayes what he was going to do, and Hayes looked at him like he'd announced plans to fly to the moon. "Morrison, that's suicide. You'll be dead in 30 seconds. Morrison checked his watch. 0327 hours, 3 hours until dawn, maybe 4 hours until Japanese reinforcements arrived, according to the intelligence briefing on the transport ship. "Corporal, I'm a coal miner. I've spent 14 years underground in tunnels that could collapse and kill me any second. This is just another tunnel that needs to be closed. I know how to do this." Hayes started to argue, but another burst from the Type 92 killed the argument. Killed it, along with a Marine named Rodriguez, who'd been crouching 15 meters to Morrison's right. Killed him with a headshot that happened so fast Rodriguez probably didn't even know he was dead. That made 18 Marines killed by 1 machine gun in 1 pillbox, and Morrison was done with calculations. He gathered his broken shovel blade, checked his grenades, 2 M2 fragmentation grenades that probably wouldn't do much against concrete, but might do something against flesh if he could get them through the firing slit, and prepared to cross 80 meters of open beach where 18 Marines had already died. The approach technique came from 14 years of crawling through mine tunnels during roof collapses, moving through spaces where one wrong movement could bring tons of rock down on your head. Morrison moved low, used every slight depression in the beach as cover, timed his movements between Type 92 bursts. The Japanese gunner fired in predictable patterns: 7-round burst, pause, 9-round burst, pause, adjust aim, repeat. Morrison covered 10 meters during the first pause, dropped flat, waited for the next burst to pass over him. Covered another 8 meters in the second pause. The coral rock tore his uniform and skin, salt water in the cuts burning like acid, and he could hear his own breathing loud in his ears, could taste copper fear in his mouth, could feel his heart slamming against his ribs. 20 meters from the pillbox, the Japanese gunner shifted fire toward a different sector, and Morrison used the opportunity to sprint, broke cover, and ran 12 meters in 4 seconds before the gunner swung back and Morrison dove behind a coral outcropping that barely qualified as cover. 32 meters from the pillbox. Morrison could see the firing slit clearly now, could see muzzle flash when the Type 92 fired, could smell the burnt propellant mixing with the salt air. He waited for another burst to sweep past him, then moved again. Slow crawl this time, staying so low his face scraped coral, moving like he was navigating a mine tunnel with 6 inches of clearance. 40 meters. The wounded Marines were close enough now that Morrison could hear their specific words, could hear them begging for morphine and water and their mothers, and he forced himself not to think about them, because thinking about them meant thinking about dying, and thinking about dying meant freezing up. 50 meters. The Type 92 fired a long burst at targets to Morrison's left, and Morrison used the noise to cover his movement, covered 8 meters in the time it took the gunner to fire 11 rounds. 60 meters. He was in the kill zone now, the open ground where the two assault teams had died, and Morrison could see bodies in the dim light, could see where Marines had fallen and bled and died, could see. The searchlight hit him at 63 meters, a Japanese position Morrison hadn't known existed, suddenly illuminating him like a stage performer in a spotlight, and the Type 92 swung toward the light, toward Morrison, and he had maybe 2 seconds before the machine gun cut him in half. Morrison did the only thing he could do. He threw himself forward in a diving roll that carried him 3 meters closer to the pillbox, came up running, sprinted the remaining distance, while the Type 92 fired and missed because the gunner was tracking where Morrison had been, not where Morrison was going. Morrison hit the pillbox wall at full sprint at 0342 hours, 15 minutes after starting his approach, and pressed himself flat against the concrete while bullets from other Japanese positions kicked up sand around his feet. He'd made it. He was alive. Now came the hard part. The firing slit was at chest height, approximately 4 inches tall by 16 inches wide, and Morrison could hear Japanese voices inside the pillbox, could hear them shouting what sounded like orders or warnings. He pulled his first grenade, yanked the pin, counted to 2, and threw it through the firing slit in a motion he'd practiced exactly 0 times in training. The grenade bounced inside, detonated 3 seconds later with a muffled crump that shook the pillbox walls, and Morrison heard screaming. The Type 92 went silent. Morrison didn't know if he'd killed the gunner or just stunned him, didn't know if there were 5 Japanese inside or 50. Didn't have time to assess because the searchlight was still on him, and Japanese infantry were moving toward his position, and he had maybe 30 seconds before they reached him. He pulled out his broken shovel blade, examined the firing slit in the searchlight glare, and saw exactly what he'd hoped to see. A gap between the steel reinforcement frame and the concrete, maybe 1/8 of an inch wide, running along the bottom edge of the slit, where concrete had shrunk slightly during curing. Morrison jammed the shovel blade into that gap, forced it in with both hands, felt it seat against the steel frame, and started prying. The technique was identical to splitting coal. Wedge inserted into natural fault line, force applied perpendicular to the split plane. Material separates along the path of least resistance. Morrison put his full body weight on the shovel blade, levered it downward, felt the concrete crack. He repositioned, drove the blade deeper, levered again. More cracking. The concrete around the firing slit was starting to fail, hairline fractures spreading from the steel-concrete interface, and Morrison was working with desperate speed because Japanese infantry were 20 meters away and closing fast. Third leverage attempt, and suddenly the steel frame shifted, moved maybe 1/16 of an inch, but that was enough. That was the critical failure point where the reinforcement lost its bond with the concrete. Morrison hit the blade with his rifle butt, driving it deeper, creating a larger gap, and the entire firing slit assembly started to separate from the surrounding concrete. Inside the pillbox, the Japanese crew realized what was happening and opened fire through the slit. Pistol fire, not the Type 92, which was apparently disabled by Morrison's grenade. Bullets sparked off the shovel blade 2 inches from Morrison's hands, but he kept working because stopping meant dying, and dying meant the pillbox stayed operational, and the pillbox staying operational meant hundreds more Marines would die on this beach. Fourth leverage, and the steel frame came loose, completely loose, separating from the concrete in a shower of dust and fragments. Morrison grabbed the frame, pulled with both hands, felt it give. The firing slit was no longer a protected 4-inch opening. It was now a ragged hole approximately 14 inches tall, big enough to. Japanese infantry hit Morrison's position at 0344 hours, and he had exactly 0 seconds to do anything except grab his second grenade, pull the pin with his teeth like they showed in training films, and shove the grenade through the newly enlarged opening into the pillbox. The grenade detonated inside while Japanese soldiers were still 10 meters away, and the explosion was louder this time. Morrison felt the concussion through the concrete wall, and then the pillbox went completely silent. No more voices, no more pistol shots, No more Type 92 fire. Morrison had just disabled the most lethal position on Tarawa's Red Beach using a broken shovel and 14 years of coal mining experience. And now he had to survive the next 10 seconds while 5 Japanese soldiers charged toward him with bayonets fixed and murder in their eyes. Corporal Hayes saved Morrison's life by ordering covering fire at 03:44 hours and 37 seconds, and 23 Marines opened up simultaneously with rifles and bars, and 1 Thompson submachine gun that cut down the charging Japanese in a crossfire that was probably as dangerous to Morrison as it was to the enemy. Morrison pressed himself against the pillbox wall, prayed to a God he wasn't sure he believed in, and listened to bullets hitting concrete inches from his head. The firing stopped after 11 seconds, all 5 Japanese soldiers dead, Morrison somehow untouched except for fresh cuts from concrete fragments. He slumped against the pillbox wall, breathing hard, hands shaking from adrenaline dump, and realized that what he'd just done was either the bravest or stupidest thing in his entire life. Probably both. Corporal Hayes was screaming something at him from 60 meters away, but Morrison couldn't hear over the ringing in his ears from grenade concussions and gunfire. He looked at his broken shovel blade, still clutched in his left hand, bent now at a slightly different angle from the leverage forces, and thought about mine tunnels in West Virginia and how the skills you learn underground sometimes save your life above ground. But the Type 92 was just 1 gun in 1 pillbox, and as Morrison's hearing returned, he could hear at least 6 more machine guns firing along Red Beach, could hear Marines dying, could hear officers screaming for engineers and flamethrowers and naval gunfire support that wasn't coming fast enough. The Tarawa assault was collapsing, turning into a massacre, and Morrison's victory at this 1 pillbox meant nothing if the other machine guns kept killing Marines by the dozens. Hayes reached Morrison's position at D0351 hours, accompanied by 3 other Marines, including a demolition specialist named Chen, who took one look at the damaged firing slit and said something that would change the entire battle. "Jesus Christ, Morrison, how did you do that? If we could do that to every pillbox on this beach, we could actually take this island." Morrison looked at his broken shovel blade, looked at Chen, looked at the 6 other machine gun positions he could see from his current vantage point, and did the mathematics one more time. 6 pillboxes times 18 Marines killed per pillbox equals 108 additional casualties if nothing changed, and that was just on Red Beach, just in the next few hours before dawn. The entire Tarawa assault involved an estimated 3,000 Marines hitting beaches defended by an estimated 47 pillboxes and fortified positions. If Morrison could teach other Marines how to use leverage and wedging to crack concrete, if he could turn his mining skills into assault tactics, if he could replicate what he'd just done at this pillbox. "Give me 6 men and 6 shovels," Morrison said, surprising himself with how steady his voice sounded. "I'll show you how to crack concrete like coal, then you're going to help me kill every Japanese machine gunner on this beach before dawn." Hayes stared at Morrison for 3 seconds, then made a decision that broke approximately 12 different regulations about chain of command and tactical procedure. "You've got your 6 men. Chen, get him shovels. I don't care if you have to steal them from dead Marines. Morrison, you've got until 0600 hours. That's 2 hours and 9 minutes. Show me how a coal miner takes a Pacific island." Morrison started teaching at 0358 hours with 6 Marines who'd never seen a mine shaft, explaining structural failure and leverage using demonstrations on damaged concrete. Concrete's strong in compression, weak in tension. When it cures around steel reinforcement, it shrinks slightly, creates micro gaps at the interface. You find those gaps, you force a wedge into them, you apply leverage perpendicular to the bond line, and the concrete fails. It's not about strength, it's about angles and finding the natural fault line. Same principle I've used for 14 years breaking coal. Now watch. He demonstrated on a damaged section of pillbox wall, showed them how to position the shovel blade, how to apply force, how to read the concrete's response. 3 Marines got it immediately. They were farm boys from Minnesota who understood leverage from working with fence posts and machinery. 2 Marines struggled but learned through repetition. 1 Marine, a kid from Brooklyn who'd probably never seen a farm or mine in his life, needed detailed step-by-step instruction but eventually understood the basic principle. By 0427 hours, all 6 Marines could successfully crack concrete around steel reinforcement using broken shovel blades and leverage. By 0438 hours, they'd identified 7 Japanese pillboxes within 200 meters that were still operational and killing Marines. Morrison divided his team into 3 pairs, gave each pair 2 targets, and explained the assault procedure. Approach under covering fire, crack the firing slit, throw grenades through the enlarged opening, withdraw before Japanese response. Simple. Deadly. Probably suicidal for at least some of them, but less suicidal than the current situation where Marines were dying in dozens every hour, and the Tarawa assault was. The first paired assault hit Japanese Position 7 at 0441 hours, and Morrison watched from 70 meters away as Marines Willis and Jackson executed the crack and clear technique he'd just taught them, working with a coordination that looked rehearsed despite having learned the procedure 18 minutes ago. Willis went low with the shovel blade while Jackson provided covering fire, and Morrison could see Willis working the leverage. 3 forceful pries that took maybe 11 seconds total before the firing slit steel frame separated from the concrete with a crack loud enough to hear over the background gunfire. Jackson threw 2 grenades through the enlarged opening in rapid succession, and the explosions came 4 seconds apart, muffled by concrete but powerful enough that Morrison felt the concussion through his boots. The Type 92 machine gun inside Position 7 went silent. Permanently silent, based on the secondary explosion that followed, probably ammunition cooking off from the grenade blasts. Willis and Jackson were already sprinting back toward Marine lines when Japanese infantry emerged from a hidden position and opened fire, but covering fire from Corporal Hayes's squad cut down the Japanese before they could hit the 2 Marines. Position 7 eliminated. Time elapsed, 43 seconds from approach to withdrawal. 1 Japanese machine gun disabled, estimated crew of 4 dead, 0 Marine casualties. Morrison felt something that might have been hope mixed with the constant baseline terror of combat. If they could replicate this 6 more times in the next 90 minutes, if the other teams performed as well as Willis and Jackson, if the Japanese didn't adapt their tactics before dawn, then maybe the Tarawa assault wouldn't become the catastrophic failure it was currently heading toward. The second paired assault targeted Position 9 at 0447 hours, and this one went wrong immediately when Marine Thompson took a bullet through the shoulder during the approach, went down hard 15 meters from the pillbox, and his partner Kowalski had to make an instant decision: abort the assault and try to rescue Thompson or complete the mission alone. Kowalski chose the mission, sprinted the final 15 meters, while Thompson provided covering fire one-handed, reached the pillbox, and started working the shovel blade into the firing slit's interface. Morrison watched Kowalski struggle with the leverage. He was doing it wrong, applying force at the wrong angle, and Morrison wanted to scream corrections but was too far away to be heard over gunfire. 15 seconds. 20 seconds. Kowalski repositioned, tried a different angle. Still wrong. The Japanese crew inside the pillbox figured out what was happening and shifted their Type 92 to fire through the slit at point-blank range, trying to hit Kowalski, who was pressed against the exterior wall, literally inches from the gun barrel. Kowalski threw his first grenade without cracking the slit, just tossed it through the 4-inch opening, and the grenade bounced back out before detonating, exploded in the open 6 meters from the pillbox, sprayed Kowalski with shrapnel that cut his face and hands, but didn't stop him. Kowalski was either the bravest or most stubborn Marine Morrison had ever seen, because instead of withdrawing after the failed grenade, Kowalski repositioned his shovel blade, found the correct leverage angle. Morrison could see the exact moment when Kowalski's technique clicked, and cracked the firing slit with one massive pry that separated the entire steel frame from the surrounding concrete. The second grenade went through the enlarged opening at 0449 hours, and this time there was no bounce back, just immediate detonation followed by sustained screaming from inside the pillbox. Kowalski didn't wait to confirm the kill, just grabbed his rifle and sprinted back toward Marine lines while Japanese positions to the north opened fire on his retreat path. Kowalski made it 30 meters before taking a round through his left leg, went down, kept crawling, and Chen ran out to drag him the final 40 meters to safety, while Morrison provided covering fire with his M1 Garand. Position 9 eliminated. Time elapsed: 2 minutes, 14 seconds. 2 Marines wounded, one requiring immediate evacuation, but another Japanese machine gun silenced and another crew dead. The mathematics were still working, slowly, expensively, but working. The third assault targeted positions 12 and 15 simultaneously at 0456 hours, a coordinated attack that Morrison orchestrated because the two pillboxes had overlapping fields of fire, and taking one without taking the other would just get Marines killed by the remaining gun. 4 Marines, Parker, Rodriguez, Chen, and Willis, back for his second assault, moved in pairs toward their respective targets while Corporal Hayes organized a base of fire that kept both Japanese positions suppressed. Morrison watched the approaches, counted seconds, held his breath when Japanese searchlights swept across the assault paths, but somehow missed the crawling Marines. Parker and Rodriguez reached position 12 at 0458 hours, started working their shovel blade, and Morrison could see they'd learned from Kowalski's mistakes. They found the leverage point immediately, cracked the slit on the second pry attempt, threw grenades with textbook precision. Position 12 went silent at 0459 hours. Position 15 was harder. Chen and Willis reached the pillbox at 0459 hours, but discovered that this particular fortification was built differently. The firing slit had no visible steel frame, appeared to be cut directly through solid concrete, with no interface to exploit. Chen examined it for 17 seconds. 17 seconds during which Japanese infantry were moving to flank his position, then made a command decision that showed either genius or insanity. He placed both his grenades against the exterior concrete wall, used det cord to link them together, lit the fuse, and sprinted away, while Willis provided covering fire. The double explosion at 500 hours didn't crack the firing slit, but it created enough concussion damage inside the pillbox that the Japanese crew evacuated through a rear entrance, stumbling out disoriented and wounded, and Marine rifles cut them down before they could recover. Position 15 eliminated, though not through Morrison's technique, through improvisation when the technique didn't apply. Morrison filed that observation for future training. Not every pillbox was built the same way, required flexibility in assault methods. By 0515 hours, Morrison's teams had eliminated 5 Japanese machine gun positions out of the 7 they'd targeted. The remaining 2 positions, 13 and 18, were proving difficult because they were positioned to cover each other, creating a crossfire that made approach nearly impossible. Morrison watched 2 separate assault attempts get driven back by interlocking Japanese fire, watched Marines trying to cross open ground and being forced to withdraw before reaching the pillboxes. The problem wasn't the technique. Morrison's crack and clear method worked perfectly once you reached the target. The problem was getting there alive when multiple machine guns could engage from different angles. At 0522 hours, Morrison made a decision that violated his own survival instincts and probably several Marine Corps regulations. He would personally assault both positions simultaneously using a modification of his technique that he'd just invented in the previous 40 seconds. The modification required 2 broken shovel blades, 30 meters of detonation cord, 4 grenades, and absolute precision timing. Morrison explained the plan to Chen and Willis in 90 seconds. Morrison would approach position 13 from the north, while Chen approached position 18 from the south, both Marines moving simultaneously to split Japanese attention. Instead of hand-throwing grenades after cracking the slits, they would wire grenades to the shovel blades using det cord, jam the blade grenade assemblies into the cracked slits, light a single fuse that would detonate both positions simultaneously, and withdraw before the explosions. Synchronized assault, synchronized detonation, hopefully synchronized elimination of both positions before either Japanese crew could respond effectively. Chen looked at Morrison's improvised blade grenade contraption and asked the only relevant question. "Has anyone ever tried this before?" Morrison shook his head. "No, I invented it about 2 minutes ago, but the physics work. Det cord burns at 6,000 meters per second, guarantees simultaneous detonation within milliseconds. We crack both slits, jam both assemblies, light the cord, and run like hell." The assault began at 05:29 hours with Morrison and Chen moving toward their respective targets, while 40 Marines provided suppressing fire that forced both Japanese positions to stay buttoned up. Morrison reached position 13 at 05:31 hours, started working his shovel blade into the firing slit interface, and immediately knew this pillbox was built stronger than the others. The concrete was harder, the steel frame was thicker, and his leverage attempts weren't creating the stress cracks he needed. He repositioned, tried a different angle, felt the blade start to bite. 30 meters south, Chen reached position 18, began his own crack attempt, and Morrison could hear Chen's shovel blade scraping against concrete. Morrison's hands were slick with sweat and blood from coral cuts reopening. His shoulders burned from repeated leverage attempts, and the Japanese crew inside position 13 was firing pistols through the slit, trying to hit him at point-blank range. Bullets sparked off Morrison's shovel blade, one round passing so close to his face he felt the heat across his nose. Third leverage attempt, and position 13's firing slit cracked, not a clean separation like the earlier targets, but a partial failure that widened the opening from 4 inches to maybe 7 inches. Good enough. Morrison jammed his shovel blade into the crack, attached his grenade det cord assembly, made sure everything was positioned correctly, then ran the det cord toward Chen's position. At 05:33 hours, Chen signaled success. Position 18's slit was cracked, and his assembly was installed. Morrison connected the 2 DT cord lengths, creating a single unified fuse that would detonate both positions simultaneously, checked his watch. 05:34 hours, 86 minutes until dawn, probably 30 minutes until Japanese reinforcements arrived, according to the last intelligence update. Morrison looked at Chen 30 meters away, nodded once, and lit the fuse. They ran. Full sprint away from the pillboxes, running toward Marine lines while det cord burned at 6,000 meters per second, and Morrison counted in his head 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, the mathematics of explosive propagation that he'd learned in West Virginia coal mines where miscalculated fuse timing meant death. 4 seconds, 5 seconds. The explosions came simultaneously at 05:34 hours and 41 seconds. 2 massive detonations that Morrison felt through his entire body, shock waves that knocked him forward and made his ears ring and filled the air with concrete dust and smoke. Morrison hit the ground hard, rolled, came up disoriented, couldn't hear anything except high-pitched ringing. Chen was beside him, also down, also struggling to stand. Behind them, positions 13 and 18 were no longer functional defensive structures. Both pillboxes had sustained catastrophic damage from the internal explosions, firing slits completely blown out, exterior concrete walls cracked and crumbling. Japanese crew members who survived the initial blasts were evacuating through rear entrances, and Marine rifle fire cut them down as they emerged. 7 Japanese machine gun positions eliminated in 53 minutes, using Morrison's crack and clear technique and its improvised variations. Estimated Japanese casualties: 43 killed, 12 wounded. Marine casualties during the assaults: 3 wounded, 0 killed. Before Morrison's technique, Marines were dying at a rate of approximately 18 per hour just from machine gun fire on Red Beach. After Morrison's technique, the casualty rate had dropped to approximately 3 per hour, and those 3 were assault team injuries rather than random beach casualties. The mathematics were undeniable, and by 0600 hours when dawn broke over Tarawa, Corporal Hayes was filing an after-action report that would reach division headquarters within 2 hours and change American assault doctrine for the rest of the Pacific campaign. But Morrison didn't have time to appreciate the tactical success, because at 0607 hours, Japanese artillery opened up on Red Beach with a bombardment that had apparently been timed for dawn, and Morrison spent the next 40 minutes pressed flat in a shell crater while 75mm rounds landed close enough to throw coral fragments across his back. The bombardment killed 14 Marines and wounded 37 more before American naval guns finally located and destroyed the Japanese artillery positions at 0647 hours. When Morrison emerged from the crater, his ears bleeding from concussion and his hands shaking from sustained adrenaline, he found Lieutenant Colonel Shoup, commanding officer of the 2nd Marine Regiment, standing in what remained of Position 7, examining the cracked firing slit that Willis and Jackson had created at the start of Morrison's assault campaign. Shoup looked at Morrison, looked at the shovel blade Morrison was still carrying, and said 4 words that would define the rest of Morrison's war. "Show me everything, right now." Morrison spent the next 90 minutes teaching assault tactics to a lieutenant colonel while Japanese snipers took occasional shots at them, and Marines died around them, and the entire Tarawa invasion hung in balance. Shoup watched Morrison demonstrate the leverage technique on 3 different pillbox types, asked detailed questions about concrete failure mechanics and steel concrete interface vulnerabilities, took notes in a small waterproof notebook that somehow stayed dry despite the chaos. At 0822 hours, Shoup made a radio call to Colonel Edson, commanding the Reserve Regiment offshore, and Morrison heard Shoup's end of the conversation. "Colonel, I need every broken shovel on this island collected and distributed to assault teams, and I need every man who's worked construction or mining or any job involving structural demolition sent to my position for immediate training. We've got a coal miner who's figured out how to crack these pillboxes like eggs, and I want every assault team using his method within 2 hours." The training program that followed was the most compressed military instruction Morrison ever participated in. 300 Marines rotated through his position in groups of 15, each group receiving a 20-minute crash course in concrete failure mechanics and leverage technique, then immediately deploying to assault Japanese positions using what they'd just learned. Morrison taught until his voice gave out at 1147 hours, then continued teaching through hand signals and demonstrations, while other Marines who'd mastered the technique took over verbal instruction. By 1300 hours on November 21, 1943, an estimated 340 Marines on Tarawa had been trained in Morrison's crack and clear method. By 1600 hours, that number exceeded 500. The technique spread through the invasion force like a beneficial infection, squad to squad, company to company, everyone wanting the knowledge that let you crack Japanese fortifications using tools you could find on any beach. The combat results over the next 6 hours were dramatic enough that American war correspondents writing about Tarawa would later call November 21st the day the Marines learned to break concrete. Between 1300 hours and 1900 hours, Marine assault teams using Morrison's technique eliminated 43 Japanese pillboxes and fortified positions across Tarawa's beaches and inland defensive lines. The technique wasn't perfect. Some pillboxes were built too strongly to crack with shovel blade leverage. Some Marines struggled to find the correct angles. Some assault teams took casualties when Japanese defenders adapted their tactics. But the overall effectiveness was undeniable. Pillboxes that would have required flamethrowers, demolition charges, or tank support were being eliminated by infantry teams equipped with nothing more sophisticated than broken shovels and an understanding of how concrete fails under stress. The Japanese defenders noticed the tactical shift, and their response was documented in captured orders from Captain Shibasaki, commanding the Tarawa garrison. A radio message intercepted at 15:34 hours included this assessment: enemy forces demonstrating unexpected capability to breach fortified positions without heavy weapons or explosives. Multiple defensive positions compromised by infantry assault using unknown technique. Recommend immediate tactical adjustment. The tactical adjustment came in the form of Japanese soldiers abandoning pillboxes before Marine assault teams could reach them, retreating to secondary positions, preferring maneuver over static defense. That adjustment played directly into American tactical advantages. Marines excelled at mobile infantry combat, could bring overwhelming firepower to bear on exposed Japanese positions. By withdrawing from their fortifications to avoid Morrison's crack and clear teams, Japanese defenders were giving up their primary advantage and accepting combat on terms that favored American numerical and firepower superiority. The turning point came at 16:47 hours when Marine assault teams reached Tarawa's main defensive line, a complex of interconnected pillboxes and trenches that intelligence had estimated would require 3 days of sustained combat to break through. Using Morrison's technique in coordinated attacks, Marines cracked 17 pillboxes in that defensive line within 93 minutes, creating gaps that allowed infantry companies to penetrate deep into Japanese-held territory. By 18:23 hours, American forces had advanced 240 meters inland from Red Beach, captured the airfield that was Tarawa's strategic objective, and effectively broken Japanese defensive cohesion. The battle wasn't over. Fighting would continue for another 2 days as Marines cleared remaining Japanese positions. But the outcome was no longer in doubt. Tarawa would be an American victory, purchased at horrific cost, but achieved faster than anyone had predicted when the first assault waves hit the beach 13 hours earlier. Morrison's personal contribution during those 6 hours was teaching, not fighting. He fired his rifle 3 times after 0822 hours, all 3 shots at Japanese snipers who were targeting his training position, and didn't hit anything as far as he knew. His combat actions consisted of demonstrating concrete failure mechanics to hundreds of Marines while the battle raged around him, explaining leverage principles while artillery fell nearby, teaching coal mining techniques to farm boys and city kids and career soldiers who'd never seen a mine shaft. He was covered in coral dust and dried blood and his own sweat. His hands were raw from repeated demonstrations, and his voice was completely gone by 1800 hours. But by his own calculations, the technique he'd taught had eliminated 43 Japanese positions that would have otherwise required significantly more time, casualties, and resources to overcome. The after-action analysis came 3 days later when Tarawa was secured and intelligence officers could compile detailed casualty statistics. The numbers told a story that military historians would still be analyzing 8 decades later. American casualties on Tarawa totaled 3,407, including 1,009 killed. Before Morrison's technique was implemented, 0600 hours, November 21st, Marine casualties were running at approximately 194 per hour. After widespread implementation of the crack and clear method, 1900 hours, November 21st, casualty rates dropped to approximately 87 per hour, a 55% reduction. Extended across the critical 6-hour period when most Japanese pillboxes were eliminated, Morrison's technique was credited with preventing an estimated 642 additional Marine casualties compared to pre-technique casualty rates. But the larger impact came from the speed of victory. Tarawa was secured in 76 hours instead of the estimated 7 to 10 days that pre-invasion planning had predicted. That accelerated timeline meant Japanese reinforcements never arrived, meant American logistics could support the operation without overstretching, meant the entire Gilbert Islands campaign proceeded on schedule. The immediate recognition came on November 24th when Colonel Shoup personally presented Morrison with a field commission to second lieutenant, completely bypassing the normal requirements for officer training because the Marine Corps needs leaders who can solve problems under fire, and Private Morrison has demonstrated that capability more effectively than any officer candidate I've seen. Morrison accepted the commission in a brief ceremony held in a bombed-out Japanese command bunker, surrounded by Marines who'd used his technique to survive battles they would have otherwise died in. The promotion came with orders assigning Morrison to the 2nd Marine Division's Training Command, where he would spend the next 4 months teaching his crack-and-clear method to every Marine unit preparing for Pacific operations. The formal recognition came in January 1944 when Morrison received the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in action against enemy Japanese forces on Tarawa, 21 November 1943. Second Lieutenant Morrison, despite extreme personal danger, single-handedly eliminated multiple enemy fortified positions using innovative assault tactics, then trained hundreds of Marines in his method, directly contributing to American victory and saving an estimated 642 Marine lives. The citation carefully avoided mentioning that Morrison's entire innovation consisted of treating concrete pillboxes like coal seams and using broken shovels as mining tools, because that level of detail would have made the Navy Cross citation sound absurd. But every Marine who'd been on Tarawa knew the truth. A coal miner from West Virginia had saved the invasion by applying 14 years of underground experience to above-ground combat. Morrison spent the rest of 1944 training Marines at Camp Pendleton, demonstrating his technique to thousands of soldiers preparing for deployments to Saipan, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. The technique evolved as it spread. Engineers developed purpose-built prying tools that worked better than broken shovels. Demolition specialists refined the explosive integration. Infantry tacticians incorporated the method into standard assault doctrine. By mid-1944, what had started as one coal miner's improvisation had become Marine Corps Assault Procedure 7B, formally documented in training manuals and taught at every infantry school. The manual credited field innovations during Tarawa operations without naming Morrison, because military bureaucracy preferred institutional knowledge over individual attribution. Morrison returned to combat in February 1945 during the Iwo Jima assault, leading a special assault company specifically organized to crack Japanese fortifications using advanced versions of his technique. His company eliminated 37 pillboxes during the 36-day battle, suffering 12 casualties versus estimated 40-plus casualties if they'd used standard assault methods. Morrison was wounded twice during Iwo Jima, shrapnel in his leg from a grenade, bullet through his shoulder from a Japanese sniper, and was evacuated to Hawaii for treatment in March 1945. He spent the final months of the war in recovery, was promoted to captain in April 1945, and was planning to return to combat when Japan surrendered in August. The war ended, and Captain Jack Morrison returned to West Virginia in November 1945, age 34, with a Navy Cross, 2 Purple Hearts, a permanent limp from shrapnel damage, and no particular interest in staying in the Marines during peacetime. The Corps offered him a regular commission with assignment to Quantico as an instructor, but Morrison declined. He'd spent 3 years fighting a war he didn't start, watching boys die in ways he couldn't prevent, teaching techniques that saved some lives while others died regardless. He was done with war. He wanted to go back underground, back to coal mines where the only enemy was rock and the only tactics were geology and leverage. He accepted his discharge in December 1945, returned to McDowell County, and applied for his old job at the mine he'd worked before the war. The mine had changed during his absence. New equipment, new safety regulations, new ownership that didn't particularly care about a veteran's combat record. Morrison was hired as a regular miner, not a supervisor, and spent the next 22 years underground extracting coal the same way he'd done before the war. He married in 1947, had 3 children, lived a quiet life that gave absolutely no indication he'd changed military assault doctrine and saved hundreds of American lives with a broken shovel. His wife knew he'd been decorated for something at Tarawa, but Morrison deflected questions with practiced skill, redirecting conversations to present concerns and avoiding the past. His children grew up knowing their father was a veteran, but not knowing the specifics, just that he'd been a Marine, had been wounded, preferred not to discuss it. Jack Morrison died on April 3, 1967, age 56, from black lung disease developed after 36 years of coal mining. His obituary in the McDowell County Times was 5 sentences long. Jack Morrison, coal miner and veteran, died Friday at McDowell County Hospital. He was 56. Mr. Morrison served with distinction in the Pacific during World War II and received the Navy Cross. He worked at the Elkhorn mine for 36 years. He is survived by his wife Helen and 3 children. The obituary didn't mention Tarawa, didn't reference 43 Japanese pillboxes eliminated, didn't explain that American assault doctrine for the rest of the Pacific campaign was based on a West Virginia coal miner's understanding of how rock splits when you hit it at the correct angle. Morrison's medals went into a box at his home, his service records were filed in Marine Corps archives, and for 31 years the full story of the broken shovel technique remained buried in classified after-action reports. The declassification came in 1998 when the Department of Defense released massive collections of Pacific War documents for the 55th anniversary of various campaigns. Among those documents was Colonel Shoup's original after-action report from Tarawa, describing Morrison's technique in detail and crediting it with decisive contribution to American victory through elimination of enemy fortified positions and prevention of estimated 640-plus friendly casualties. Military historian Dr. Terry Robert Chen discovered the report while researching improvised assault tactics, recognized its significance, and published his findings in 1999 in a paper titled The Coal Miners' War: How Mining Techniques Won Tarawa. The paper detailed Morrison's background, explained the mechanics of concrete failure and leverage, and calculated the tactical impact. 43 pillboxes eliminated on November 21st alone, estimated 216 Japanese soldiers killed in positions that Morrison's technique helped eliminate, and approximately 12,400 American Marines who survived the broader Tarawa campaign because the assault was completed faster and with fewer casualties than pre-invasion estimates. That 12,400 number came from detailed analysis of casualty rates and operational timelines. Dr. Chen calculated that if Tarawa had required the estimated 7 to 10 days to secure instead of the actual 76 hours, American casualties would have reached approximately 5,800 instead of the actual 3,407, a difference of 2,093 additional casualties at the lower end of the estimate range. But the larger impact came from the technique's adoption across subsequent Pacific operations. Saipan, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, every major amphibious assault after Tarawa incorporated Morrison's crack and clear method as standard doctrine, and casualty analysis from those operations consistently showed that fortified positions eliminated using Morrison-derived techniques resulted in 40 to 60% fewer friendly casualties compared to historical norms for pillbox assault. Extended across all Pacific operations from December 1943 through August 1945, Dr. Chen estimated that Morrison's innovation contributed to preventing approximately 12,400 American casualties that would have occurred using pre-Tarawa assault methods. The United States Marine Corps issued a formal recognition in 2000, 57 years after Tarawa, posthumously awarding Morrison the Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary contribution to Marine Corps assault doctrine, resulting in significant casualty reduction across multiple Pacific campaigns. Helen Morrison, Jack's widow, accepted the medal at age 83 during a ceremony at Marine Corps Base Quantico, accompanied by her children and 19 grandchildren who'd never known their grandfather had done anything particularly special during the war. The Marine Corps created a permanent exhibition at the National Museum of the Marine Corps, displaying one of Morrison's actual broken shovel blades, recovered from Tarawa in 1947 during battlefield archaeology, alongside photographs, tactical diagrams, and testimonials from Marines who'd used his technique. The exhibition text includes this assessment. Morrison's recognition that civilian industrial skills could be adapted to military applications represents one of the most effective examples of cross-discipline innovation in modern warfare. Modern Marine Corps assault doctrine still incorporates the principles Morrison discovered in 1943. Infantry officers are taught to look for structural weaknesses in fortified positions, to exploit material failure points using leverage and force multiplication, to think creatively about how civilian tools and techniques can solve military problems. The lesson isn't use broken shovels against concrete. Modern explosives and powered tools have made Morrison's specific technique obsolete, but rather understand materials science well enough to exploit enemy fortifications using whatever resources are available. It's a lesson that applies equally to coal miners in 1929 West Virginia and infantry officers in any modern conflict. The Elkhorn mine, where Morrison worked for 36 years, closed in 1972, 5 years after his death. The mine entrance was sealed in 1974, and nothing remains except a historical marker noting that the site once employed over 800 miners during peak production years. Morrison's name isn't on the marker. His grave at Green Hill Cemetery in McDowell County is a simple headstone with dates and family information, no mention of Tarawa or Navy Cross or Distinguished Service Cross. But in the archives of the National Museum of the Marine Corps, in declassified tactical assessments from 1943-1945, in the survival of 12,400 American Marines and their descendants. In all those places, Jack Morrison's legacy endures. The coal miner who understood that every structure has weak points where stress concentrates, who saw a problem that military engineers couldn't solve, who fixed it with 18 inches of broken steel and 14 years of underground experience, and who saved an army by teaching them that sometimes the best weapons aren't designed in laboratories, they're improvised by people who know how materials fail and how leverage works, and how to hit rock at exactly the right angle to make it split.